got the promotion. You launched the business. You stepped into the room you've been working toward for years. And the first thing you felt wasn't pride. It was panic. A quiet, creeping voice that said, what if they find out? What if I'm not actually as capable as they think I am? What if this whole thing unravels and everyone realizes I have no idea what I'm doing? If you've ever felt that, you are not broken. You're not a fraud, and you are absolutely not alone. What you're experiencing has a name. It's called imposter syndrome. And today, we're going to dismantle it completely so it never has the same power over you again. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share is going to change the way you see yourself. Let's start with what imposter syndrome actually is, because most people have kind of a surface level understanding of it that keeps them stuck. Imposter syndrome is not a mental illness. It's not a character flaw. It's not evidence that you don't belong. It is a psychological pattern in which a person doubts their accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud, despite clear external evidence of their competence. Now, that last part is critical. Despite clear external evidence of their competence, that means that the problem is not your ability. The problem is actually your inability to internalize your ability. You have the results. You have the track record. You have the skills. But somewhere between the achievement and the acknowledgement, there's a gap. And imposter syndrome lives in that gap. It was first identified in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. They initially studied high-achieving women, but subsequent research found that it affects people across every gender, every industry, and every level of success. In fact, and this might surprise you, studies suggest that up to 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. 70%. That means that the person you think has it all together, there's actually a very good chance that they're fighting the same battle. The difference between people who overcome it and people who are paralyzed by it isn't talent. It isn't experience. It is understanding what's actually happening and having the tools to respond differently. That's what today is about. Here's something that nobody prepares you for. Imposter syndrome doesn't get quieter as you become more successful. For a lot of people, it gets louder. Every new level brings a new version of the voice. New room, new people, new stakes. And your brain, doing what brains do, starts scanning for evidence that you don't belong here. This is why some of the most accomplished people in the world have spoken openly about experiencing it. Maya Angelou, one of the most celebrated writers and poets of the 20th century, once said she was convinced that eventually someone would show up and say she had no idea what she was doing. Albert Einstein described himself as an involuntary swindler whose work didn't deserve the recognition it received. These are not people who lacked ability. These are people whose internal narrative hadn't caught up to their external reality. And that's the thing about imposter syndrome. It is not correlated with incompetence. It is correlated with growth. It shows up most aggressively at the edges of your comfort zone, at the frontier of becoming, which means, and I need you to hear this, if you're experiencing imposter syndrome right now, it might not be a sign that you don't belong. It might be a sign that you're exactly where growth requires you to be right now. The discomfort isn't evidence against you. It's evidence of expansion. But knowing that isn't enough, because the voice doesn't care about logic. So let's talk about the different forms it takes, because recognizing your specific pattern is the first step to breaking it. Dr. Valerie Young, one of the leading researchers on imposter syndrome, identified 5 distinct types. And understanding which one you are changes everything about how you address it. Type 1. The perfectionist sets impossibly high standards. And when they inevitably fall short of those standards, they take it as proof that they're not good enough. They focus almost entirely on how they could have done better, rather than how well they did. A 95% success rate doesn't register as success to them. The 5% failure is all they see. If this is you, you've probably delayed launches, held back ideas, and stayed invisible longer than you needed to because the work was never quite ready. The truth is, the work was never going to feel ready because ready isn't the bar. Perfect is. And perfect doesn't exist. The superhero feels like a fraud compared to everyone around them, so they compensate by working harder than everyone else. They become addicted to the validation that comes from achievement. They can't rest, can't slow down, because slowing down feels like falling behind, and falling behind feels like exposure. If this is you, you know what it feels like to be exhausted and still not feel like enough. The accomplishments pile up, and the relief lasts about 30 seconds before the next thing needs to be conquered. The natural genius judges competence by ease and speed. If something takes them too long to learn or too much effort to master, they take that as evidence that they're not actually talented. They've been told their whole lives that things come naturally to them. So when something doesn't, it feels like the curtain has been pulled back. If this is you, you probably avoid challenges where you might struggle publicly. You stick to what you already know you're good at, and anything that requires visible effort feels like weakness, rather than the completely normal, healthy process of learning. The soloist believes that asking for help is the ultimate tell. If they need support, if they can't figure it out on their own, then they must not really belong in the role they're in. They refuse collaboration, not because they don't want it, but because needing it feels like a confession. If this is you, you've probably been drowning quietly more times than anyone around you knows. And the pride you take in handling everything alone is costing you more than you realize. The expert believes there's always more they should know. They measure their worth by what they haven't learned yet rather than what they already know. They constantly seek out more certifications, more training, more credentials. Not because they need them, but because they believe that then they'll finally feel legitimate. If this is you, you've been preparing to start for a very long time, and the starting keeps getting postponed because the learning never feels complete. Take a moment right now and ask yourself which one of those 5 showed up for you, because naming it is the beginning of dismantling it. Before we get into how to overcome imposter syndrome, let's talk about why it exists, because understanding the mechanism makes it easier to interrupt. Your brain is not your enemy. It is an incredibly sophisticated survival machine that has been doing its job for hundreds of thousands of years. And one of its primary jobs is threat detection. So when you step into a new environment, a new role, a new level, a new room, your brain scans it the same way it would scan an unfamiliar landscape. It looks for signals, and the signal it's looking for is, do I belong here? Am I safe here? When the environment is unfamiliar, when you're the new person, the youngest in the room, the first in your family to do this thing, your brain doesn't have enough data to confirm safety. So it defaults to caution. It generates doubt. It whispers, be careful, this might not be for you. This is called negativity bias, and it was incredibly useful when the unfamiliar thing was a predator. It is considerably, however, less useful when the unfamiliar thing is a board meeting or a camera or a new title. There's also something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which tells us that the less people know about a subject, the more confident they tend to feel about it. And conversely, the more deeply someone understands something, the more aware they become of everything that they don't yet know. In other words, your imposter syndrome might actually be a marker of genuine expertise. The people who feel most like frauds are often the people who understand their fields well enough to know how complex it really is. Your awareness of your own limitations isn't weakness. It might be one of your greatest professional strengths. But awareness alone doesn't silence the voice. So let's talk about what actually does. These 5 steps are not a one-time fix, okay? They're a practice, a new way of relating to yourself that over time genuinely rewires the way your brain processes your own competence. Step 1, name it in real time. The next time the voice shows up, don't fight it. Don't suppress it. Name it. Out loud if you can. In your head if you have to. Say, that's imposter syndrome talking. This single act of labeling creates distance between you and the thought. It moves the experience from this is true to this is a pattern I recognize. Neuroscientists call this affect labeling, and research shows that it measurably reduces the emotional intensity of the experience. You are not the voice. You are the one who notices the voice. And the moment you remember that, its power over you begins to shrink. Step 2, build your evidence file. Imposter syndrome is selective memory. It remembers every failure and forgets every win. So your job is to create a record that your brain cannot ignore. Start an evidence file, a document, a note on your phone, or a journal, whatever works for you. And in it, I want you to write down every win, every piece of positive feedback, every moment where you showed up and delivered, every time someone trusted you with something important, every obstacle you overcame that you didn't think you could. Now, this is not arrogance. This is accuracy. You are correcting a cognitive distortion with facts. And on the days when that voice is the loudest, you go back to the file. You read it. You remind your brain of what it conveniently forgot. Step 3, reframe failure as data. Imposter syndrome turns every mistake into evidence of fundamental inadequacy. Your job is to retrain that response. So when something goes wrong, instead of asking, what does this say about me? Ask, what does this teach me? See, one question is about identity and the other is about information. And only one of them moves you forward. Every person that you admire has a catalog of failures behind them. The difference is not that they failed less. The difference is that they extracted the lesson and kept moving instead of using failure to confirm a story about who they are. Failure's not a verdict. It's a data point. Treat it like one. Step 4, normalize the discomfort. This is one of the most important reframes that you can make, and it's deceptively simple. Feeling uncomfortable in a new situation is not evidence that you don't belong. It is evidence that you are in a new territory. And new territory always feels unfamiliar before it feels like home, right? Think about every role, every skill, every environment that feels natural to you now. There was a time, guaranteed, when it didn't. When it felt exactly like this. When you wondered if you were in over your head. And then you stayed. You learned and you grew. And now it's yours. The discomfort you're feeling right now is not a stop sign. It's a growing pain of someone who is in the exact process of growing and becoming the person that they were meant to be and that they need to be for this next level. Normalize it, expect it, and walk through it anyway. Step 5, talk about it. This might be one of the most counterintuitive steps because everything about imposter syndrome tells you to hide it, to perform confidence you don't feel, to never let them see you sweat. But the research is clear. One of the most effective ways to reduce the power of imposter syndrome is to talk about it. Talk about it with a trusted friend, a colleague, a mentor, someone who gets it. Because what happens almost every single time, without exception, is that the person you tell looks at you and says, I feel that way too sometimes. And in that moment, the fraud dissolves. Because frauds don't have the self-awareness to question themselves this deeply. Frauds don't lose sleep over whether they're good enough. The fact that you care this much about getting it right is one of the clearest signals that you actually belong. Secrecy feeds imposter syndrome, but honesty starves it. Here's the thing nobody says at the end of these conversations, and I think it's the most important thing of all. Imposter syndrome may never fully go away, and that's okay. The goal is not to reach a point where you never doubt yourself again or you never feel that imposter syndrome. The goal is actually to reach a point where the doubt no longer makes decisions for you, where you can hear the voice and move anyway, where you can feel the fear and show up anyway, where you can walk into the room, feel the discomfort, name it for what it is, and then take your seat at the table anyway. Because here's the truth. The people who changed their lives, built their businesses, stepped into their purpose, they weren't fearless. They were just willing. Willing to act in spite of the voice. Willing to bet on themselves before the evidence was complete. You have earned your place, not because everything has been perfect, no, but because you kept going when it would have been so much easier to stop. I know that feeling. That is not what a fraud does. That is what a warrior does. And it's time you started seeing yourself as one. Here's your challenge for this week, and I want you to actually do this. Pick one moment from the last 6 months where imposter syndrome showed up and held you back. One moment where you doubted yourself, pulled back, stayed quiet, or didn't go for it. And then ask yourself, what would I have done if I had trusted myself? Write that answer down. And then as boldly as you can, go do that thing this week. Not perfectly, not when you feel ready. This week. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what you're going to do. I read every single one. And I want to see who you're becoming on the other side of this. If this video gave you something real today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the Bold Life Suite, and I'll see you in the next one.